After a diagnosis of vasculitis, there's often a loss of energy and physical limitations that come with it. Sometimes there's a loss of athletic ability if you had that beforehand, and having to accept more limitations in general. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the loss of well-being and gaining more vulnerability because of vasculitis. And I can say from personal experience, so that you and the viewers know, I was an athlete prior to my diagnosis. I was 50 when I was diagnosed, and I was in, believe it or not, the best shape of my life. I was extremely physical and competitive at the time. And after my diagnosis, it didn't take too long with all the medications and things for me to lose most of that. But the big thing was after my first remission, when I thought it would all come back and I thought I would be who I was prior to diagnosis, and that didn't happen. And then I had, 4 or 5 more flares and 4 or 5 more remissions. And, now I'm 13 years later still fighting. So Dana, if you could start us out on this and talk a little bit about what the vasculitis patient can expect and how to cope with it.
Sure. I'm so glad you brought that, and I'm so sorry to hear that was your experience. And I think that that's very common with most vasculitis patients. It feels sometimes like the whole trajectory is all about loss, losing this, losing that, and of course with the prospect of losing everything. As a clinician, it's part of my job to help patients maintain hope. And that's often hard. It doesn't mean denying the uncertainties or the sadnesses or the anxieties, but creating a space for those things to be discussed and hopefully tolerated, and then, if possible, set aside so you could focus on the things that you still do have. And I know, Sarah, that you are also an athlete, so you can speak to this probably better than I, who am not an athlete.
I wouldn't call myself like a super athlete. I mean, at the time I was running somewhat competitively. I was running some 10Ks, and I felt at the time of diagnosis, like you, Kathy, I mean, I felt like, wow, I was on like the top of my game. I was running super fast splits, and I was like, woohoo, everything was going really well. And then things just kind of, like you said, started to crash down. And I think what I went through within that first year was a reevaluation of my identity, because it felt like all the things that I had that identified me as Sarah, all the things that I felt that I could look to and say, yes, this is who I am, and I could start counting them off on my fingers, they had either gone away or they had changed dramatically. So it boiled down to, like, I had a new identity and I had to redefine what my new identity was. And so the process, like you said, Dana, of like assessing the losses and grieving those losses and going through that process of like, I had that, yes, I don't have it anymore, but I can redefine myself in a new way. And I think what happens sometimes also with chronic illnesses is that it doesn't happen once. It can happen repeatedly throughout the course of your illness based on how you're doing, like you said, Kathy, with flares, or, maybe really fun new symptoms start popping up and it forces you to redefine yourself. So for example, I'm going through some stuff with my nerves. Well, one of the things that I used to define myself with was crochet. I love to crochet. Well, that's not something I can really do well now. So how am I then able to reassess where I'm at with that? If I need to let it go, am I grieving that? And is there something then that I can do to replace or redefine what was lost? So it's that constant process of, like Dana said, of assessing your losses, but then also looking ahead with hope to see how you can redefine yourself in a new way with a new identity.
That's some great information. I can tell you that also as a patient that I learned that it's not the end of the world, and that I was going to age no matter what. And I listened to my doctor, and he said, "Why don't you get with a personal trainer?" Well, that was a random thought. I'd never thought of doing that in my life. I trained people. So I did start seeing a personal trainer, and he did start helping me build my strength back up. But we also found that I had some damage, and that there was certain things that were not going to build back up. So like you, Sarah, I had to learn to replace them with certain things. But, you know, there's also just beauty in every phase of being in remission. So it's fine to learn to, you know, do some of these new things. I wanted to sort of bring us around to a little bit more current question, because this is a lot on people's minds. Patients gain more vulnerability due to immunosuppression, including the fear of COVID as just one more layer of concern. Dana, you want to talk a little bit about, can you address how to handle this fear? I'm not sure we all deal very well with it when we think our lives are at risk.
Sure. One thing that I am noticing with my populations is that, you know, everybody was kind of isolated beforehand, and now they're isolated even more. And so, again, it relates to the theme of loss and grief over the things that you're not able to do, and the fear of the unknown, and the fear of your special vulnerability due to your illness. So part of that is being able to take control of the things that you can actually control. Every day, if you can just kind of think of what are one or two things that I could control today in my life. Perhaps it's not safe for me to go to the grocery store, but perhaps I can get online and have a cocktail party with my friends, you know, via Zoom or something. It's a special hit that the vasculitis population and any chronic disease population is having these days with COVID.
Sarah, you want to weigh in on that some?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. I would joke sometimes that like we were already kind of professional isolationists. So, I mean, it was already kind of there, but it really took on more of an imposed kind of flavor to it, and feeling like, you know, kind of almost like I had to go through this like process of acceptance all over again when COVID hit. Is that I kind of accepted it on some level, but then I had to be reminded of it all over again. It's like, oh yeah, I need to stay home. And I think you're right, Dana. I mean, it was definitely that I felt like I could do some things being immunosuppressed, but it seemed like my circle got even smaller once COVID hit. And feeling like, okay, I feel even more kind of the whole staring at my four walls kind of feeling. And that was hard. And I think one of the other kind of phenomenons that I was speaking with one of my friends within the vasculitis community, and she brought this up, and it's true, is like the whole notion of contending with the anger with it. When you feel like, here I am, I'm trying to do what's best for me by being immunosuppressed, but no one else is playing by the same rules. And feeling that sense of anger around it, I was contending with that a lot. And so working through that anger, and like you said, what I kind of landed on was what Dana mentioned there. It's like, what do I have control over? You know, really at the end of the day, what can I control within my world? And to let go of the things that I can't control. And the anger at other people for not playing by the COVID rules was one of the things that I had to kind of let go of. And that was hard, and it was a process, and every day brings something new for sure. And you know, and I think what is troubling too is that it's kind of this ever-changing field of what we can expect with it, and that uncertainty, I think, is difficult when it comes to dealing with COVID. You know, are we able to take the vaccine when it comes up? Are we able to do the convalescent plasma stuff when it comes up? I mean, so all these kind of unknowns and all this stuff out there in the future that we just don't know how it's going to be affecting us, I think is one of the big impacts of COVID on vasculitis patients for sure.
Yeah, I would say that I saw some posts early on where on some of the vasculitis Facebook pages about, one of them said, quarantine, you're all amateurs. We know how. But then reality set in a little bit, and there was, a little bit of fear of contact with somebody, which if you were in remission, you were thinking about flare. And if you weren't in remission and you were currently flared, you were thinking about, oh God, what if I wind up one of those patients in the hospital that I see on TV? So it's good to know that the right thing to do, which maybe some of us had to learn over time, is to, as you said, deflect and not let those angers and other things, bury you daily. But speaking of that, we often have anxiety about a possible relapse after achieving remission. So how should we manage or accept this potential reality and level of fear? I think I'm always waiting, or not so much anymore, because I'm one of the few lucky ones off treatment with 7 years of remission. But even up to maybe 5 years after no flares, I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. So there was always anxiety. Sarah, maybe you can relate most personally to this and also tell us, how you move forward.
Right. I mean, I think the big thing that I've contended with when it comes to remissions is that people have a tendency of thinking remission and thinking kind of it's put into the language of like cancer, right? And when I first started looking at the psychological impact that my disease may be having on me way back when, I ran across this book, and boy, for the life of me, I wish I could remember what it was, but it was a fascinating book that talked about how, with cancer or other kind of serious illnesses, the whole notion of remission and waiting for the other shoe to drop, when that is always out there. But I think with chronic illnesses, it's that repeated process that happens time and time again. That you may be cruising along, you may be doing really well, and then and everything's going fine, and then things go sideways, and then it happens all over again. So it's a repeated process. Remission is always kind of an unknown and a very, it's definitely something that you strive for, but it may be kind of a very fickle and very repetitive thing that happens throughout our lives. And I think that's where some of the work that I've had with working with Dana that's been super important is focusing in the present. And because the word anxiety relates to fear of the future and thinking too much of the future and ignoring maybe the blessings and the good things you got going on right now. And so a lot of, in talking about what my disease and how it's impacting me, a lot of it is just bringing it down to the here and now so that I can focus on the good stuff going on right now. I mean, Dana, you'd put this in better words than I could. So.
I'm not sure I could do that, because those are really good words, but I think another thing that is so true of this disease process is that there comes to be a sort of learned helplessness about this, because everything is so random and strange, and okay, now this is my new reality, it's going to be like this. And so,
how many times have I said that to
you? So, people in your life are like, oh, really? Is that really true? So, and you go from specialist to specialist to doctor, and you start to feel like nothing that you do is going to change or improve or mitigate this horrible situation. It makes you feel like you're crazy. And so it really is so extra important to stay in the moment. My daughter likes to say that, when she was little, she would say, someday I'm going to die. It's like, yeah. And I would say, but not today. It's not a today thing. And so that's the only thing that any of us have. And maybe that's simplistic, but it does help with the crazy feeling that you get when you're pursuing your treatments and your specialists and your mitigation.
No, really good advice from both of you. Stay very much in the moment and stop stop. I know it's hard for so many people to not look into their future because we kind of all do. But when you're living with a chronic illness, you need to, I agree, you totally need to be in the moment and the only thing you should look out into the future is how much better it'll be at some point.
Yeah.
And